She woke up in her brother's friend's bed, with no memory of how she got there. The brother's friend, the millionaire who never showed his true self. Nothing would ever be the same after that morning. If you like love and romance stories, watch until the end, subscribe to this channel and leave your comment saying where you're listening from. Stay tuned. The room was too dark for a Saturday morning in Chicago. Emily woke up wrapped in white sheets that exuded a woody, masculine perfume, captivating and disconcerting. Her heart raced when she recognized that aroma, even before understanding where she was. Nathan. The name floated in her mind like a breeze carrying ashes and fragmented memories. Nathan Hayes, Jason's older friend, her brother. The man who had been watching her for years with that penetrating gaze, as if he knew something about her that she herself hadn't yet discovered. In his early 30s, he carried a magnetic and disturbing presence that always made her uncomfortable. During the few times they had met, Emily sat up in bed with cautious movements, analyzing every detail of the environment. The thick linen curtains completely blocked the daylight, creating an almost unreal atmosphere. The furniture was minimalist and elegant, each piece chosen with surgical precision. A white rose rested on the bedside table, next to a glass of crystal-clear water and a pearl necklace that definitely wasn't hers. Everything there seemed prepared, with almost devotional zeal, or perhaps with a calculating coldness that made her shiver. The absence of pain in her body contrasted with the growing panic in her mind. She couldn't remember how she had gotten there, but her body showed no signs of violence. On the contrary, there was a strange feeling of peace, as if she had voluntarily surrendered to something that her conscious mind refused to accept. Emily was 20 years old and a virgin by choice, not a moralistic or religious choice, but a silent gesture of resistance. Since she was 12, when her family fell apart, after her mother's suicide, she had built invisible walls around herself. She had never trusted anyone's touch, never allowed anyone to get closer than necessary. She had grown up being just Jason's sister, invisible at parties, discreet to the point of completely disappearing amid conversations. She found refuge in books, in introspection, in the silence that had become her armor against the world. Nathan had always been the disturbing exception to this dynamic. He saw her when everyone ignored her, observed her with an intensity that left her vulnerable and exposed. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made her freeze. The door opened slowly, and Nathan appeared, a white towel wrapped around his waist, his dark hair wet from a recent shower. Drops of water ran down his defined chest, and Emily felt a wave of heat course through her body, a reaction that frightened her as much as the situation itself. Nathan's gaze was charged with a tension she couldn't decipher. It wasn't guilt, at least not the kind she expected to find. It was something more primitive, deeper. Maybe fear. Maybe an old guilt, rooted in secrets that predated that morning. He approached with slow, deliberate movements, took the pearl necklace from the nightstand, and extended it toward her. His voice came out as a hoarse whisper when he murmured, "You don't remember." It wasn't a question. It was a statement that carried the weight of something much greater than Emily could comprehend at that moment. Without waiting for a response, Nathan left the room, leaving her alone with her doubts and the echo of his voice reverberating in the silence. Emily held the necklace between trembling fingers, observing how the pearls reflected the little light filtering through the curtains. It was an expensive, old piece, with the kind of discreet elegance that spoke of generations of wealth and tradition. She got up from the bed, looking for her clothes. She found a white dress carefully folded on a leather armchair, next to her purse and shoes. Everything was there, untouched, organized with the same meticulous care that characterized the rest of the room. She dressed quickly, anxious to leave, that place that seemed suspended in time. When she finally left Nathan's apartment, located in one of Chicago's most upscale neighborhoods, Emily carried more questions than when she had arrived. The city pulsed around her with its usual chaotic energy, but she felt disconnected from everything, as if she had just woken up from a disturbingly real dream. In the days that followed, her mind became a minefield of fragments and sensations. Small pieces of the previous night began to emerge like shards of glass. The melancholic sound of a piano, the full-bodied taste of a red wine, a slow dance under soft lights, a muffled laugh that could have been hers or his. And the touch. Nathan's touch on her nape, soft as a caress and burning like fire. Nothing more. No certainty about what had really happened between them, just the persistent feeling that her life had irreversibly changed on that obscure night. Emily spent the following days in a state of constant agitation that Jason couldn't ignore. Her older brother, normally absorbed in his own problems, began to ask questions she didn't know how to answer. How to explain that she had woken up in his best friend's bed without remembering how she got there. How to confess that she felt a disturbing attraction to a man who represented everything she despised in Chicago's elite. Jason was 25 and carried on his shoulders the weight of being solely responsible for Emily since their parents' death. He worked as a graphic designer at a small agency, earning enough to maintain the modest apartment they shared in Wicker Park. He was a handsome man with a relaxed manner, but Emily noticed that he hid things. There were whispered phone conversations, vague commitments he never fully explained, and a constant tension he tried to disguise with jokes and forced smiles. The relationship between Jason and Nathan had always intrigued Emily. They met at university, where they studied business administration together, but they came from completely different worlds. Nathan was heir to a pharmaceutical fortune, the only child of a traditional Chicago family. Jason was a middle-class boy who studied on scholarship and worked on weekends to pay his expenses. Even so, they developed a solid friendship that withstood time and social differences. On the Thursday following that disturbing morning, Emily decided to investigate on her own. She began by researching Nathan on the internet, discovering details about his life that left her even more confused. He wasn't just rich, he was absurdly rich. Heir to Hayes Pharmaceuticals, a pharmaceutical empire that dominated the American market. The company had been founded by his grandfather in the 50s and expanded by his father until it became a regional powerhouse. The photographs she found showed Nathan at charity events, business awards, and gala dinners. Always impeccably dressed, always with that penetrating gaze that seemed to see beyond appearances. There were rumors about his personal life, brief relationships with women of high society, but nothing lasting. He seemed to be a man who kept people at a distance, someone who preferred control to intimacy. It was then that Emily found a newspaper article that made her freeze. It was from 15 years ago, an investigative report about a scandal involving Hayes Pharmaceuticals. The company had been accused of bribing doctors to prescribe unnecessary medications, causing the death of dozens of patients. Emily's father, who worked as an accountant at one of the involved clinics, was one of the whistleblowers of the scheme. The discovery hit her like a punch to the stomach. Her father had been one of those responsible for exposing Hayes Pharmaceuticals' corruption. The company suffered million-dollar fines, lost important contracts, and saw its reputation damaged. Shortly after, Emily's father was found dead in his car, apparently the victim of a heart attack. 2 months later, her mother committed suicide, leaving a letter saying she couldn't live with the guilt of having pressured her husband to report the scheme. Emily felt the world spin around her. The connection between her family tragedy and Nathan couldn't be a coincidence. The man who fascinated and disturbed her in equal measure was heir to the empire that had destroyed her family. The fortune that allowed him to live in that luxurious apartment, wear expensive clothes, and frequent the best places in Chicago originated from the same scheme that had led her parents to death. That night, when Jason came home, Emily confronted him with the discovery. She expected to see surprise in his eyes, but found only a deep weariness, as if he had known everything for a long time. Jason poured himself a beer, sat on the couch, and looked at her with an expression that mixed guilt and resignation. "You knew," Emily said, more a statement than a question. "You always knew who he was." Jason took a long sip before answering. "I knew, but it's not what you're thinking, Emily. Nathan had nothing to do with what happened to our parents. He was just a kid at the time. He didn't even work at the company." "But he benefited from it," Emily retorted, feeling anger grow inside her. "He inherited everything. Every dollar he has is stained with our father's blood." "Life isn't that simple," Jason said, avoiding her gaze. "Nathan helped me when I needed it. If it weren't for him, I wouldn't be here today talking to you." Emily felt there was something more, a layer of truth that Jason wasn't yet ready to reveal. She sat beside him, gently touching his arm. "Tell me everything, Jason. Please, I need to understand." Jason sighed deeply, as if preparing to open a wound he preferred to keep closed. "When you were 15, I got involved with the wrong people. I was lost, angry about everything that had happened with our parents. I started selling drugs for some guys from the East Side. I thought it was an easy way to get money to take care of you." Emily felt her heart race. She had never known this, part of Jason's life. Never imagined he had been involved with drug trafficking. "What happened?" Nathan found out. "I don't know how, but he always had contacts everywhere. He came to me before things got ugly, before I was arrested or killed. He paid my debts, talked to the right people, got me out of that life." Jason paused, his eyes fixed on the beer bottle. "Since then, he kind of looks after us, discreetly, without you knowing." Emily felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. "What do you mean he looks after us?" "This apartment, for example, it's his, or at least he pays the rent. Your college, too. He created a fake scholarship so you could study literature without suspecting anything." The revelation hit Emily like an avalanche. Her entire life was a lie constructed by Nathan. She wasn't independent. She hadn't achieved anything on her own merit. She was just another piece in the game of a powerful man who played with people's lives as if they were puppets. Emily couldn't sleep that night. Jason's revelations echoed in her mind like a disturbing mantra, destroying every certainty she had about her own life. She got up before dawn and decided to confront Nathan directly. She could no longer live in ignorance, being manipulated like a doll in a shadow theater. Nathan's apartment was in one of the most exclusive buildings in the Gold Coast, a tower of glass and steel that rose like a monument to power and wealth. Emily arrived there at 7 in the morning, determined to get answers. The doorman hesitated to announce her, but something in her expression must have convinced him of the urgency of the situation. Nathan received her in a dark silk robe, his hair still disheveled from sleep. There was a half-empty cup of coffee on the American-style kitchen table, and the smell of toast in the air suggested she had interrupted his breakfast. He didn't seem surprised by her early morning visit, as if he had been expecting her since she discovered the truth about her life. "You lied to me," Emily said without preamble, entering the apartment without being invited. "My entire life is a lie built by you." Nathan closed the door slowly, studying her with that penetrating gaze that always made her uncomfortable. "I never lied to you, Emily. I simply never had the opportunity to tell the truth." "Opportunity?" Emily laughed, but there was no humor in her voice. "You had years to tell me that you owned my life, that I was just a doll in your hands, that each of my achievements was actually your disguised generosity." "It wasn't like that," Nathan said, approaching her with cautious movements as if fearing she might run away. "I helped Jason because he needed it, and I helped you because you deserved to have the life your parents would have wanted. For you." Emily felt tears of anger burn her eyes. "Don't come to me with that Good Samaritan talk. You did this out of guilt, didn't you? Because your family destroyed mine. Because your money is stained with my father's blood." Nathan's face contracted, as if she had slapped him. For a moment, she saw beyond the mask of control he always wore, glimpsing a deep pain he kept carefully hidden. "My father was already dead when I discovered what he had done. I was 22 and inherited a company built on lies and corruption. I've spent the last 10 years trying to clean up the family name, compensating victims, changing the company's practices." "And that gives you the right to play with my life?" Emily retorted. "To decide my future without me knowing?" "I never wanted to control you," Nathan said, his voice becoming lower, more intense. "I wanted to protect you. There are things you don't know, Emily. Things about that night, about why you're here." Emily felt her heart race. "Then tell me. Tell me everything. About that night, about my parents, about what you really want from me." Nathan stepped away, walking to the window that offered a panoramic view of the city. Chicago stretched before him like a map of possibilities and dangers, and Emily realized that he seemed lost in that urban immensity, despite all his power and wealth. "I met your mother before she married your father," he finally said, without turning to look at her. "She worked as a nurse at the hospital where my grandfather was admitted. I was 17 and she was 25. She was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen." Emily felt a chill in her stomach. There was something in Nathan's voice that suggested this story wouldn't end well. "I fell in love with her in an obsessive way," Nathan continued. "I visited my grandfather every day just to see her. I wrote letters I never delivered, made plans for a future that would never exist. She was kind to me, maternal, but never saw me as anything more than a confused boy." "And then she met my father," Emily murmured, beginning to understand the complexity of the situation. "Then she met Robert, a man her age, honest, hard-working. They married 2 years later. I went to the wedding. I stayed at the back of the church, watching her walk to the altar in that white dress that you were wearing that night." Emily felt as if all the pieces of a dark puzzle were finally fitting together. "You kept my mother's wedding dress." Nathan turned to her, and Emily saw unshed tears in his eyes. "I bought the dress from the store where she had rented it. I kept it like a romantic idiot keeps relics of an impossible love. When I saw you wearing that dress at Jason's party, it was as if time had gone backward, as if she had come back. But I'm not her," Emily said, feeling a confused mixture of anger and compassion. "I am me." "I know that now," Nathan sighed. "But that night, seeing you in that dress, dancing the way she danced, laughing the way she laughed, I lost control. I brought you here with the excuse that you had drunk too much, but actually I just wanted to be near you. I wanted to imagine for one night how it would have been if she had chosen you instead of my father," Emily completed. Nathan nodded, suddenly looking older, more vulnerable. "But I didn't touch you, Emily. I swear by everything sacred that I didn't touch you. You passed out on the couch, and I carried you to bed. I only took off your shoes, covered you, and sat in that armchair all night watching you sleep, because for the first time in 15 years, I felt at peace." Emily absorbed those words, trying to reconcile the image of the powerful and controlling man she had built in her mind with this fragile human being haunted by an unrequited love. There was something deeply disturbing and at the same time touching about his confession. "Why did you never tell me this before?" "Because I knew you would hate me. And because—" Nathan hesitated, as if struggling with himself. "Because I was afraid that my feelings for your mother were transferring to you, and that would be wrong in every possible way." Emily approached him slowly, studying his face in the morning light. She saw in him traces of a wounded boy who had never overcome his first passion, but also a man who carried the weight of difficult decisions and crushing responsibilities. "And now?" she asked. "What do you feel now?" Nathan looked at her with an intensity that made her tremble. "Now I know you're not her, and that what I feel for you has nothing to do with the past." Emily remained silent for long minutes, processing everything she had heard. Nathan's confession completely changed the dynamic between them, but it also raised even more complex questions. If he hadn't lied about that night, if he really hadn't touched her, then why did she feel as if something fundamental had changed inside her? "I need time," she finally said, retreating toward the door. "I need to think about all this." Nathan didn't try to stop her, but Emily could feel his gaze burning her back as she walked away. In the elevator, she leaned against the mirrored wall and saw her own fragmented reflection, as if she were an incomplete puzzle. There was something in her eyes that she didn't recognize, a new intensity that frightened her. The days that followed were emotional torture. Emily tried to resume her normal routine at the university, but discovered she couldn't concentrate on anything. Literature classes, which had been her refuge before, now seemed superficial and irrelevant. She found herself analyzing each text through the lens of her new reality, seeing manipulation and power where before she saw only art. Jason tried to talk to her, but Emily remained distant. She was still processing the fact that her own brother had participated in the elaborate staging that was her life. She understood his motives, knew he had done what he thought was best, but the feeling of betrayal persisted like an open wound. was during one of these melancholic afternoons, as she walked through the University of Chicago campus, trying to clear her thoughts, that Emily decided to conduct her own investigation. If Nathan had kept her mother's dress all these years, what other memories did he keep? What other secrets were hidden in that luxurious apartment? She returned to the Gold Coast building the following Thursday, this time with a plan. She had memorized Nathan's schedule through her internet research. He always lunched at the office on Thursdays, participating in meetings that extended until late afternoon. She convinced the doorman, a middle-aged man named Mr. Marcus, that it was a romantic surprise. The apartment was silent and bathed in the golden light of late afternoon when Emily entered. She moved like a detective, examining each room with new eyes. The minimalist decoration that had impressed her before now revealed its secrets: discreetly positioned photographs, specific books on the shelves, objects that told a story. In the office, she found what she was looking for: an old mahogany desk housed locked drawers, but Emily knew where people like Nathan usually hid their keys: among books, inside a fake edition of The Great Gatsby. Her hands trembled when she finally managed to open the first drawer. The letters were there, dozens of them, written in a young and desperate handwriting, all addressed to her mother, none ever sent. Emily read them with a heavy heart, seeing through the words the evolution of an obsessive love that lasted years. The first letters were innocent, almost childish. The last were dense with desire and despair. Margaret, one read, "Today I saw you at the market with Robert. You looked so happy that I almost managed to convince myself that I made the right choice in never giving you these letters. But when you smiled at that child in the cart next to you, I imagined how it would be if it were our son. If it were our family. The pain was so intense that I had to leave running." Emily found photographs too, her young mother radiant, some obviously taken from a distance without her knowing. There was one in particular that made her freeze. Margaret pregnant, leaving the doctor's office with Nathan in the background of the image, watching. He had followed her mother's pregnancy like a silent ghost. The drawer below revealed something even more disturbing: a diary written by Emily's mother herself. The yellowed pages contained confessions she never imagined existed. Margaret knew about Nathan's passion. More than that, she had felt flattered and at some moments tempted. "Robert works so hard that sometimes I feel invisible," read an entry from 15 years ago. "Today I met Nathan at the supermarket, and we talked for almost an hour. He looks at me in a way my husband has forgotten to do. I know it's wrong, I know he's too young, but sometimes I imagine how it would be if I had made different choices." Emily turned the pages with growing horror and fascination. Her mother had fought against her own feelings, but there were moments of weakness, moments when she considered the possibility of a different life. The final entry in the diary, dated a few days before her death, was the most revealing. "Nathan came to see me yesterday. He said he knew about the scandal, that he could help Robert if I left with him. He offered money, protection, a new life. For a terrible moment, I almost accepted. But then I remembered Emily, Jason, the life we built together. I said, no, but I saw in his eyes that this isn't over. He will come back. When Emily grows up, when she looks more like me, he will come back to seek what he thinks he lost." Emily dropped the diary as if it were on fire. Her mother's words echoed in her mind like a dark prophecy. Nathan hadn't fallen in love with her, Emily. He was trying to relive an impossible love through her, using her as a substitute for the woman he never managed to have. She heard the sound of the key in the lock and froze. Nathan had returned early. Emily quickly put away the letters and the diary, closed the drawers and ran to the living room. When he entered, she was standing in front of the window, pretending to admire the view of the city. "Emily," he said, the surprise clear in his voice. "I didn't expect to see you here." She turned slowly, studying his face with new eyes. She saw in him not just the powerful and mysterious man who had fascinated her, but also the obsessed boy who had never overcome his first passion. "We need to talk," she said, "about everything. About my mother, about me, about what you really want." Nathan approached, but Emily raised her hand, keeping him at a distance. There was something different about her posture, a new determination he hadn't seen before. You read the letters," he said. It wasn't a question. "I read everything," Emily confirmed. "The letters, my mother's diary. I know she was aware of your feelings. I know you approached her before she died." Nathan's face paled. "Emily?" "No," she interrupted him. "Now it's my turn to speak. For years you built a fantasy around my family. First you were obsessed with my mother, then with me. You used us as pieces in a sick game, trying to revive a romance that never existed." "It's not like that," Nathan protested, but his voice sounded weak, unconvincing. "Then explain it to me," Emily challenged. "Explain to me why you kept her wedding dress, why you have photographs of me since I was a child, why you orchestrated our entire financial life to keep us close." Nathan remained silent, and Emily saw in that silence the confirmation of everything she had discovered. He had transformed his obsession with Margaret into a new obsession with her, treating her as an extension of the woman he never managed to have. "I fell in love with you," he finally said, but the words sounded empty. "No," Emily retorted. "You fell in love with the idea of me, with the possibility of finally having the daughter of the woman you always desired. You never saw me as Emily. You always saw me as a second chance to have Margaret." The truth weighed between them like a sentence. Emily felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. Relief at finally understanding the sick nature of her situation. Sadness at realizing that the feelings she was beginning to develop for Nathan were based on an elaborate lie. Nathan remained motionless for long seconds, as if Emily's words had physically hit him. When he finally spoke, his voice was broken, carrying a vulnerability she had never witnessed before. "You're right," he admitted, collapsing into one of the leather armchairs. "For years I convinced myself that what I felt for you was different, but deep down I knew I was trying to recreate something that never existed." Emily felt an unexpected pang of compassion seeing him like this, stripped of all his defenses, but she couldn't allow herself to be manipulated by his vulnerability again. "So what do we do now, Nathan? Do we continue pretending there's something real between us?" "I don't know," he answered honestly. "For the first time in my life, I really don't know what to do." Emily walked to the window, observing the frantic movement of the city below. Chicago pulsed with its own life, indifferent to the personal dramas unfolding in its skyscrapers. She felt an urgent need to be part of that real life, to escape the artificial bubble that Nathan had created around her. "I'm moving out," she announced without turning. "I'm going to get a job, my own apartment. I'm going to build a life that's really mine." "And college?" "I'll take a break. Work during the day, study at night at a public university, the way it should have been from the beginning." Nathan stood up, approaching her with hesitant steps. "Emily, you don't need to do this. I can continue helping without..." "Without? What?" She turned abruptly. "Without expecting anything in return? I don't believe that, Nathan, and even if it were true, I don't want your help anymore. I want to discover who I am when I'm not being supported by your dirty money." The expression dirty money hit him like a slap. Emily saw the pain in his eyes, but didn't allow herself to back down. She needed to be cruel to free herself from the web he had woven around her life. "All right," Nathan finally said. "I'll respect your decision, but at least let me explain about the money, about what really happened to your parents." Emily hesitated. Part of her wanted to leave immediately, cut all ties with this man and his complicated history. But another part, the part that had always been consumed by curiosity, needed to know the complete truth. 5 minutes, she conceded. Nathan took a deep breath, as if preparing to open the deepest wound of his soul. "When I discovered what my father had done, the corruption scheme, I wanted to report everything. I was 22 and had a romantic notion of justice, but my lawyer advised me to wait, to gather more evidence." Emily crossed her arms, keeping herself rigid. "And meanwhile, more people died." "Yes," Nathan admitted without trying to excuse himself. "Meanwhile, your father discovered everything on his own and decided to act. He was brave in a way I wasn't." "And you let him die to protect your own skin." No, the denial came out, as a roar. When I learned that Robert was investigating, I tried to find him. I wanted to offer protection, collaboration, anything, but he didn't trust me. And he was right not to trust. Emily saw tears in Nathan's eyes, but forced herself to remain impassive. Continue. On the night he died, Robert came to me. He was terrified, said he had received threats. He asked for my help to protect his family. Nathan paused, fighting against emotion. I said I would do anything, that I would give any amount. He looked at me with such contempt. Because you were offering money instead of justice. Exactly. He told me he didn't want money. He wanted me to have the courage to do the right thing, to report my own father, even if it meant losing everything. Nathan moved away, walking to his desk. I promised him I would. That the next morning I would go to the police with all the evidence. Emily felt her heart race. But he died that night. He died believing I would finally do the right thing. And I did, Emily. The next morning I turned everything over to the FBI. But it was too late for him. The silence that followed was heavy, laden with guilt and regret. Emily tried to process this new information, fit it into the complex puzzle that was her family's history. And my mother. Why did she kill herself? Nathan sat down again, suddenly looking exhausted. Margaret blamed herself for Robert's death. She thought that if she hadn't encouraged him to report the scheme, he would still be alive. When she came to me the week after the funeral, she was completely destroyed. That's when you offered for her to run away. With you. I offered a new life away from all this, a chance to start over without the weight of guilt, but she... Nathan swallowed hard. She said she couldn't abandon you, that you were all that remained of Robert in the world. Emily felt the first tears burn her eyes. Her mother had chosen to stay for her and Jason, but even so she hadn't been able to bear the weight of guilt. 2 months later she was dead, Emily murmured. And I felt responsible for that too. If I had acted earlier, if I had been braver. Nathan shook his head. When Jason got involved with drugs years later, I saw a chance to do something right, to protect what remained of the family I had helped destroy. Emily finally understood the complexity of the situation. Nathan wasn't just the villain of her story, nor the romantic hero he sometimes seemed to be. He was a deeply wounded man, carrying real and imaginary guilt, trying to redeem himself in ways that sometimes did more harm than good. You never saw me as Emily, she said, but this time her voice wasn't charged with anger. You saw me as a chance for redemption, a way to save the daughter of the woman you loved and couldn't protect. Nathan nodded slowly, and in the process, I ended up turning you into just another victim of my obsession. Emily approached him, studying his face in the golden afternoon light. She saw in him not just the powerful man who had fascinated her, nor the obsessive who had manipulated her, but also a genuinely broken person trying to find some meaning in his actions. I need to go away, she said softly. I need to find out who I am away from all this history, away from you. Nathan raised his eyes to her, and Emily saw a painful acceptance in them. You're right. You deserve a life that's your own. She walked toward the door but stopped before leaving. Nathan? Yes? Thank you for telling me the truth, finally. When Emily left the apartment that time, she knew she was leaving behind not just a man, but an entire version of herself. The Emily who had been secretly supported, protected, and manipulated was dying. In her place, a woman determined to build her own story was being born, even if it meant facing a much harsher and more unpredictable world. 3 months passed since Emily left Nathan's apartment with the promise to build a life of her own. Reality, she discovered, was much more brutal than she had imagined in her moments of romantic determination. Sharing a tiny room in a Chinatown boarding house with 2 other girls, working 12 hours a day as an attendant in a downtown bookstore, studying at night at a college preparatory course, all this while Jason bombarded her daily with worried messages. Independence tasted like reheated coffee, and smelled like a crowded bus during the morning rush. But it also had something Emily had never experienced before: the absolute certainty that each achievement, no matter how small, was genuinely hers. The first salary, paid in crumpled bills by the bookstore owner, a grumpy Portuguese man named Mr. Augustus, was like receiving a diploma. She cried in the tiny bathroom of the boarding house, holding that money as if it were the most precious treasure in the world. Jason appeared at her door at least twice a week, always with excuses, to visit her. He brought food, offered help with studies, invented non-existent problems that needed her opinion. Emily knew he was suffering as much as she was with the distance, but she also understood that she needed to prove to herself that she could survive without the safety net that Nathan had created. "You're getting too thin," Jason commented on a rainy Thursday, watching her devour the sandwich he had brought from home. "And those dark circles?" "I'm fine," Emily insisted, although she knew her appearance told a different story. "I'm learning who I really am." "And who are you, then?" Jason asked, with a mixture of concern and genuine curiosity. Emily paused, chewing slowly as she considered the question. "I'm stronger than I imagined, and more stubborn too, but I still don't know. I still don't know if I'm capable of forgiving." She didn't need to explain forgiving what or whom. Jason knew that Nathan hovered over their conversations like an unmentioned ghost. In the first days after her departure, Emily had convinced herself she would never think of him again. But she discovered it was impossible to completely erase someone who had influenced her life so deeply. They were small things that reminded her of him. The smell of a masculine perfume in the bookstore elevator, a song playing on the radio, a black car similar to his stopped in traffic. Emily found herself unconsciously looking for his figure in crowds and always became irritated with herself when she realized what she was doing. The turning point came on a Friday at the end of the month, when Emily was closing the bookstore alone. Mr. Augustus had left earlier for a medical appointment, leaving her responsible for the cash register and closing. It was almost 9 at night when she finally managed to lower the metal doors and lock everything. The street was dark and deserted, illuminated only by the old lamp, posts that created yellowish circles of light on the sidewalk. That's when she realized she was being followed. At first, she thought it was paranoia. There was a man in a dark suit who seemed to be heading in the same direction as her for several blocks. But when Emily changed routes, taking a side street to test her suspicion, the man made the same move. Her heart began to race, and she quickened her pace. The pursuit became more obvious when Emily tried to enter an open bar to take refuge. The man positioned himself across the street, clearly waiting for her to leave. He was a middle-aged guy, face marked by old scars, expensive clothes, but with a threatening air that contrasted with the elegance of the outfit. Emily called Jason, but the phone went straight to voicemail. She tried to call an Uber, but the app showed there were no cars available in the area at that hour. Panic began to take over when she realized that the man had crossed the street and was approaching the bar. That's when she did something she had promised herself she would never do. She called Nathan. The phone rang only once before he answered. "Emily?" His voice was charged with an urgency that suggested he had always been waiting for this call. "I need help," she said without preamble. "Someone is following me, and I—" "Where are you?" Nathan interrupted her, and Emily could hear the sound of keys and quick footsteps on the other end of the line. She gave the address of the bar, trying to keep her voice steady while watching the man approach closer and closer. "Nathan, I'm scared. Stay where you are. Don't leave the bar. I'm coming to get you." Emily had never heard Nathan speak that way. There was an authority in his voice that went beyond concern, as if he were a general coordinating a military operation. She stayed in the bar, ordering coffees she couldn't drink while watching the man through the window. He had strategically positioned himself at the corner, where he could see all the exits of the establishment. Nathan arrived in 15 minutes, an impossible time considering Chicago traffic, but he managed. Emily saw him before he even entered the bar. The black BMW stopped in front of the establishment with a screech of tires, and Nathan got out of the car with an urgency she had never seen in him. When their eyes met, Emily felt something break. inside her. It had been only 3 months, but it seemed like an eternity since she had last seen him. He was different, thinner, with deep dark circles, his hair less groomed. He looked like a man who hadn't slept properly in weeks. "Where is he?" Nathan asked, his eyes already scanning the street through the glass. Emily pointed to the corner, but the man had disappeared. "He was there a few minutes ago. He followed me for several blocks." Nathan pulled out his cell phone and made a quick call. "Mike, I need you to come get Emily. We're at Joaquin's bar on Aurora Street." He paused, listening to something on the other end. "No, she's fine, but I need to investigate something." "Who's Mike?" Emily asked when he hung up. "My driver. And personal security. He'll take you home safely." Nathan sat beside her at the counter, maintaining physical distance, but studying her face with an intensity that made her blush. "How are you?" The simple question carried so much weight that Emily felt tears threatening to overflow. How was she? Exhausted, afraid, proud, confused, and, she finally admitted to herself, missing him. Missing him, the feeling of security his presence provided, the intense conversations, even the unresolved sexual tension that had always existed between them. "I'm surviving," she answered honestly. "Learning to be independent." "I saw your enrollment in the prep course," Nathan said softly. "Congratulations. Literature at the University of Chicago. I always knew you could do it." Emily looked at him surprised. "How did you—" "I said I would respect your decision to build your own life. I didn't say I would stop worrying about you." There was something in the way he spoke that made Emily realize that the last 3 months had been as difficult for him as they had been for her. For the first time, she considered the possibility that his feelings were more complex than the simple obsession she had diagnosed. "Nathan," she began, but was interrupted by the arrival of Mike, a robust man in his early 50s who greeted Nathan with the familiarity of someone who has worked together for a long time. "I need you to take Emily home," Nathan said, "and I want 2 of our men watching the boarding house tonight." "Nathan, you don't need to," Emily protested. "Yes, I do." His voice was firm but not authoritarian. "Someone followed you tonight. That wasn't a coincidence. There are things about my past, about what happened to your family, that haven't been completely resolved." Emily felt a chill in her stomach. "What do you mean?" "I mean that maybe our story didn't end when you decided to leave." Emily spent the following night in a state of constant alert, even knowing there were Nathan's security guards watching the boarding house building. Mike had been kind but professional in taking her home, briefly explaining that she should avoid going out alone in the next few days until the situation was clarified. The reality that her independent life might be in danger because of Nathan's past deeply irritated her, but also awakened a morbid curiosity about the secrets he still hadn't revealed. On Saturday morning, Jason appeared at her door earlier than usual, carrying fresh bread and a worried expression that he tried to disguise with forced casualness. "Nathan called me last night," he said, without beating around the bush. As soon as Emily opened the door, he told me what happened. Emily sighed, letting him enter the tiny room she shared with her boarding house roommates. The girls had left early, one to work at a clothing store in the Loop, the other for her job at a beauty salon in Wicker Park. The space, which was already small for 3 people, seemed claustrophobic when Jason was present with his 6-foot height. "Did he say anything else?" Emily asked, preparing coffee on the electric hot plate she kept on an improvised small table. "He said you might be in danger because of something related to his family's business, something that comes from a long time ago." Jason sat in the only available chair, studying his sister's face. "Emily, I think you should come back to the apartment, at least until this passes." "No." The answer came out firmer than Emily expected. "I'm not going back to that life, Jason. I'm not going to be protected and kept like a bird in a golden cage. Even if it means risking your life?" The question hung in the air like a sentence. Emily poured the coffee into 2 uneven mugs, trying to organize her thoughts. There was something deeply disturbing about the idea that, even away from Nathan, she was still connected to his problems, as if it were impossible to completely escape the web he had woven around her existence. The answer came on Monday, when Emily was working at the bookstore. Mr. Augustus had gone out for lunch. leaving her alone with the regular customers, retirees who came to browse books without buying anything, students looking for cheap editions of literature classics, and occasionally some lost tourist looking for city maps. That's when the man entered. It wasn't the same one who had followed her on Friday, but there was something equally threatening about his presence. He was younger, perhaps in his 40s, dressed in an expensive suit, but with visible tattoos on his neck that suggested a less respectable past. His eyes scanned the bookstore with the precision of someone evaluating territory. "You're Emily." "Silver," he said. It wasn't a question. Emily felt her blood freeze but forced herself to maintain composure. "The bookstore is open to the public. If you're looking for a specific book, I can help you." The man laughed, a humorless sound that made Emily shiver. "I'm not here for the books, little girl. I'm here because you and your family owe a very old debt, and it's time to pay it." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, but you do." The man approached the counter where Emily was positioned, resting his hands on the surface of the old wood. "Your daddy destroyed a lot when he decided to become a whistleblower, made a lot of people lose a lot of money, and now that Nathan Hayes is back in the game, it's time to settle accounts." Emily tried to keep her voice steady. "My father died 8 years ago. Any problem you have is with him, not with me." "It doesn't work like that, beautiful. Family debt is paid with family blood." The man took an envelope from the inside pocket of his jacket and placed it on the counter. "Here are some interesting photos of your new home, your work, the places you usually go. We want you to know that we're always watching." Emily picked up the envelope with trembling hands, already anticipating what she would find. The photographs showed her leaving the boarding house, walking to work, talking with Jason at the door of the building. There was even an image of her in the window of her own room, clearly taken from another building. The invasion of privacy was absolute and terrifying. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice finally betraying the fear she felt. "We want Nathan Hayes, and you're going to help us get him." Emily shook her head. "I have nothing to do with Nathan. We haven't spoken in months." "Are you sure about that?" The man smiled maliciously. "Because we heard he came running, like a dog in heat when you called asking for help last Friday. Seems like you have more influence over him than you think." The revelation that they knew about the Friday incident confirmed Emily's worst fears. She was being constantly watched, every movement catalogued and analyzed. The feeling of claustrophobia was overwhelming. "Listen here, girl," the man continued, his voice becoming lower and more threatening. "You're going to set up a meeting with Nathan. You'll call him to a place that we're going to choose, and you'll do it without raising suspicions. And if I refuse?" The man took a second photo from his pocket, this one showing Jason leaving his apartment in Wicker Park. "Then your brother will pay for your stubbornness. And then you. The choice is yours." Emily felt her legs weaken. The threat was clear and direct. Cooperate or see Jason get hurt because of her. It was exactly the kind of manipulation she had. I spent months trying to avoid, but now it came from a much more dangerous source than Nathan. "How long do I have?" "Until tomorrow night. Here's a card with my number." The man placed a small piece of paper on the counter. "Call me by 6 in the evening with the details of the meeting." "And Emily?" He leaned in even closer, and she could smell the strong odor of cigarettes on his breath. "Don't try to be smart. Don't try to warn Nathan about what's happening. We're watching both of you. Any suspicious movement and your brother pays the price." After the man left, Emily collapsed in the chair behind the counter, her hands shaking uncontrollably. She was trapped in an impossible situation. Protecting Jason meant betraying Nathan, but protecting Nathan meant putting her brother at risk. It was as if the past had come back to charge her for crimes she had never committed. When Mr. Augustus returned from lunch, he found Emily visibly shaken. "Girl, you're white as paper. Did something happen?" Emily invented an excuse about a headache and asked to leave early. She needed to think, needed to find a way out of that situation that didn't involve sacrificing either of the people she loved. But as she walked through the busy streets of downtown Chicago, a disturbing truth began to form in her mind. Maybe there had never been a way to completely escape from Nathan. Maybe her attempt at independence had been just an illusion, and She had always been destined to be connected to him in some way. The difference now was that for the first time, she would have to make a conscious choice about the role he would play in her life. That night, Emily stayed awake until late, watching the city lights through the small window of her room. She knew there were Nathan's security guards somewhere out there watching over her, but she also knew there were other eyes observing, waiting for her to make a mistake. For the first time since she had left Nathan's protection, Emily began to question whether her search for independence was really worth the risks it was bringing to the people she loved. The following morning brought a decision she never thought she would have to make. Emily picked up the phone and dialed the number she had memorized months ago, but had promised never to use again. Nathan answered on the first ring, as if he had been waiting. Emily. His voice carried a mixture of relief and concern that made something contract in her chest. Emily took a deep breath, trying to keep her voice steady. I need to see you tonight. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Emily could imagine Nathan analyzing the tone of her voice, looking for clues about what had motivated her to call. Did something happen? Let's meet at the signature room at 8 o'clock, Emily said, ignoring the question. It was the location the man had specified, a public, busy place where it would be difficult for Nathan to suspect a trap, but easy for the thugs to position themselves strategically. Emily, are you okay? Your voice sounds strange. For a moment she almost gave in, almost told him everything about the threat, about the man in the bookstore, about the photographs. But then she remembered the image of Jason leaving home, completely unaware of the danger hanging over him. 8 o'clock, Nathan. Don't disappoint me. Emily hung up before he could ask more questions, her hands trembling so much she almost dropped the cell phone. She had made the choice. Now she had to live with the consequences. The rest of the day passed in a fog of anxiety. Emily tried to work normally at the bookstore, but each customer who entered made her startle. Mr. Augustus commented again about her pale appearance, suggesting she see a doctor. If only it were as simple as a physical illness. At 5 in the afternoon, Emily called the number the man had given her. He answered on the second ring, as if he too had been waiting. Very good, girl. What's the plan? Signature room, 8th floor of the Willis. Tower, 8 o'clock, he'll be there. Excellent, and you, of course, will also be there to ensure he doesn't suspect anything. The man's voice had a tone of satisfaction that made Emily feel nauseated. Remember the rules. No warnings, no heroic attempts. You'll act normally until we receive our signal. And after, what happens to him? That's not your problem, beautiful. You just need to make sure he shows up. Emily hung up and immediately called Jason. She needed to see him, one last time before everything fell apart. When he answered, his voice sounded tired but affectionate. Hi, little sister, how was your day? Jason, can you come pick me up at work today? I want to have dinner with you before I resolve some things. Sure. Is everything okay? Emily closed her eyes, recording in her memory the sound of her brother's worried voice. It is. I love you, Jason. Never forget that. Hey, what's with the strange talk? You're scaring me. I just wanted you to know. They had dinner at a small Italian restaurant in River North, not far from the Willis Tower. Jason was visibly concerned about Emily's strange behavior, but she made an effort to maintain a normal conversation, asking about his work, about future projects, about anything that would keep her anchored in the present. At 7:30, Emily said goodbye to Jason with a longer than usual hug. Take care, she murmured in his ear. You too, he replied, holding her by the shoulders and studying her face. Emily, if you're in trouble... I'm not, she lied. I'm just resolving some pending issues. The Willis Tower pulsed with its characteristic nightlife. Emily went up to the restaurant on the 8th floor, choosing a table with a view of the illuminated city. Chicago stretched before her like a sea of lights, beautiful and indifferent to the human dramas unfolding on its floors. Nathan arrived punctually at 8, dressed in a dark suit that enhanced his natural elegance. Emily felt her heart race when she saw him approach, walking between the tables with that controlled confidence that had always fascinated her. For a terrible moment, she allowed herself to imagine what it would be like if this were really a romantic encounter. if they were just two people trying to resolve their complicated feelings. "You look beautiful," he said as he sat down, and there was a sincerity in his voice that made Emily want to cry. "Nathan, she began, but the words died in her throat when she saw two men strategically position themselves at nearby tables. They weren't the same ones who had threatened her, but there was something in their postures that suggested the same type of controlled danger. "Emily, what's going on?" Nathan had leaned forward, his voice low but urgent. "Since you called today, I feel that something is wrong." Emily looked into his eyes and saw not only concern, but also a tenderness she had spent months trying to forget. It was as if, in that moment of imminent danger, all masks had fallen, and she could see the real man behind the layers of power and mystery. "I've made a terrible mistake," she whispered. Before Nathan could respond, Emily saw movement in her peripheral vision. The men at the nearby tables were rising simultaneously, and she realized there were others too, at least 4 or 5 people she hadn't noticed before, all converging discreetly toward their table. "Nathan," she said, her voice laden with urgency and regret, "forgive me." The expression of confusion on his face was quickly replaced by understanding when the men approached. Nathan showed no surprise or panic. Instead, his posture subtly changed, as if a switch had been flipped, transforming him from dinner companion to alert predator. "Mr. Hayes," said the group's leader, a middle-aged man with scars on his face, whom Emily recognized as the same one who had approached her in the bookstore. "How good to finally meet you in person." "Richard Sanders," Nathan replied, and Emily was surprised to realize he knew the man. "I thought you were dead." Richard laughed, an unpleasant sound that made other restaurant customers turn curiously. "Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated, as Mark Twain would say, although you and your father did your best to make them come true." Emily felt as if she were watching a theatrical play for which she didn't know the script. There was a history between these men that predated her existence, layers of conflict and revenge that she was only beginning to glimpse. "If you have a problem with me, resolve it with me," Nathan said, his voice remaining calm despite the obvious tension of the situation. "Leave the girl out of this." "Ah, but the girl is exactly the central point of all this," Richard replied, gesturing for his men to position themselves closer. "You saw what happens when someone messes with your precious Emily. You came running like an obedient dog when she asked for help. That gave us very valuable information about your weak points." Emily felt guilt consuming her from within. Her desperate call on Friday had revealed to Nathan her true feelings, but it had also given his enemies a powerful weapon to use against him. "What do you want, Richard?" "I want justice. I want you to pay for what your father did to my business, to my family." Richard's eyes shone with an old and well-nurtured fury. "And I want you to feel the same pain I felt when I lost everything." Emily finally understood. She wasn't just a hostage or a bargain. She was Richard's way of causing the maximum possible emotional damage to Nathan. It was a calculated and cruel revenge that used his feelings as a weapon. In that moment, watching Nathan prepare to face mortal danger because of her, Emily made a decision that would change everything. She would no longer be a passive piece in others' games. It was time to take control of her own story, even if it meant risking everything. Emily abruptly stood up from her chair, making it scrape on the restaurant's wooden floor. The sound echoed through the tense environment like a shot, and all eyes turned to her. For a moment she felt the absolute weight of the situation. She was at the center of a vendetta that had begun decades before she was born, surrounded by dangerous men who saw her life only as currency for exchange. "Enough," she said, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Enough of this pathetic staging." Richard stared at her with surprise, clearly not expecting the prey to take the initiative. "Sit down, girl. This is adult talk." "Adult talk?" Emily laughed, but there was no humor in her voice. "Adults don't spend decades planning revenge because of businesses that went wrong. Adults don't threaten innocents to reach their real targets." Emily walked toward Richard, ignoring the alarmed looks from his henchmen. "You want Nathan to pay for what his father did? Great, but I won't be your instrument of torture." "Emily," Nathan murmured, trying to stand up, but one of Richard's men immediately placed his hand on his shoulder, forcing him to remain seated. You don't have a choice, girl, Richard said. But Emily noticed a note of uncertainty in his voice. She had broken the script he had prepared. We always have choices, Emily retorted, and my choice is to tell everyone in this restaurant exactly who you are and what you're doing here. Emily turned to the neighboring tables, where other customers were watching the scene with growing curiosity. These men, she said loudly, are criminals who are threatening me and trying to kidnap my companion. Could someone please call the police? The restaurant atmosphere changed instantly. Murmurs spread among the customers, some already pulling out cell phones. The waiters stopped what they were doing, clearly undecided about how to proceed. The maitre d' approached nervously, trying to understand the situation. Richard became visibly irritated. You don't know who you're messing with, girl. I know exactly who I'm messing with, Emily responded, surprising herself with the firmness of her own voice. I'm messing with a weak man who needs to threaten innocent women because he doesn't have the courage to face his real enemies directly. It was then that Emily noticed something that completely changed her perception of the situation. In Nathan's eyes, she saw not just concern, but also admiration, pride, as if he were seeing her truly for the first time, not as the daughter of the woman he had loved, nor as an extension of his own obsessions, but as Emily, strong, defiant, owner of her own strength. You want a war, Richard? Nathan said, his voice low but charged with an authority that made everyone in the group turn to him. Then we'll have a war, but it will be between men on our terms, not using women as shields. Richard hesitated, clearly calculating his options. The restaurant was now clearly aware of the drama unfolding, and Emily could see that he realized his position was rapidly deteriorating. That's when Emily had her second revelation of the night. She approached Nathan, placed her hand on his face and kissed him. It wasn't a soft or hesitant kiss, it was intense, desperate, full of months of repressed longing and a passion she finally allowed herself to feel completely. When they separated, Nathan stared at her with an expression that mixed shock and desire. Emily, I love you, she said, the words coming out like a confession she had kept for too long. I don't love the romanticized version of you I built in my head, nor the demonized version I created when I discovered about the past. I love you. With all your flaws, your mistakes, your complicated history. Emily turned to Richard, who was watching the scene with an expression that mixed frustration and calculation. And you know something? You can try to hurt us, you can try to destroy our life, but you won't be able to destroy what we feel for each other, because it's real and it's ours. Richard made an abrupt gesture to his men, clearly losing patience with the situation that had escaped his control. Enough theater. Let's resolve this the hard way. It was then that Emily realized they weren't alone. Mike, Nathan's driver and security, had discreetly appeared with other men, strategically positioning themselves throughout the restaurant. Emily herself had been so absorbed by the emotional situation that she hadn't noticed the arrival of reinforcements. I don't think so, Richard, Nathan said, finally standing up. You made a fatal mistake when you decided to involve Emily in this. You turned a business matter into something personal. The tension in the restaurant was palpable. Two groups of dangerous men faced each other, separated only by a few tables, and by the determination of a young woman who had decided to take control of her own destiny. Last chance, Richard, Nathan continued. You and your men leave now, and we resolve our differences in another way. Or we can do this here in front of all these innocents and see who comes out alive. Emily saw Richard quickly assess the situation. He was at a numerical disadvantage, in hostile territory, with too many witnesses. More importantly, he had lost his main trump card. Emily was no longer a passive victim he could use against Nathan. This isn't over, Richard finally said, gesturing for his men to retreat. You may have won this battle, Hayes, but the war is far from over. So be it, Nathan responded. But next time, come after me directly. Leave innocent people out of it. As Richard and his henchmen withdrew, Emily felt her legs weaken. The adrenaline that had sustained her during the confrontation was dissipating, leaving her trembling and exhausted. Nathan held her, his hands strong and warm against her skin. "It's all right," he murmured in her ear. "You were incredible, brave, and incredible." Emily allowed herself to lean on him for a few moments, breathing in his familiar scent, feeling the safety of his arms. But she knew there was still much to resolve between them. The declaration of love had been real, visceral, but it didn't magically erase all the problems that had separated them. "We need to talk," she said when she finally moved away. "About everything, about us." Nathan nodded, his eyes still shining with the intensity of what had happened. "About us," he agreed, "and about how we're going to build something real this time, something based on truth, not obsessions from the past." Emily smiled, feeling for the first time in months that perhaps it was possible to have both, her independence and the man she loved. But she knew it would take courage to build this future together, especially with enemies like Richard still lurking. The restaurant slowly returned to normal, but Emily knew her life had changed forever that night. She had found her own voice, her own strength, and more importantly, she had found a way to love without losing herself in the process. 6 months later, Emily woke up in the apartment she had chosen for herself, not the cramped room of the boarding house, nor the oppressive luxury of Nathan's penthouse, but her own space in Lincoln Park that she had secured with her new job as an assistant editor at a small literary publishing house. The bookstore job had been a bridge, but this new position was a dream realized through her own effort. The golden light of Saturday morning came through the windows overlooking the tree-lined street, and Emily allowed herself a few moments of absolute contentment. There was something deeply satisfying about waking up in a place that was completely her own, paid for with money she had earned, decorated with furniture she had chosen. Nathan still hadn't spent the night there. It was a conscious decision, by both, to build the relationship slowly with solid foundations, without the desperate urgency that had marked their first encounters. They saw each other 3 or 4 times a week, had dinner together, talked for hours, and yes, there were moments of physical intimacy that left Emily trembling with desire, but always with limits that she established. The cell phone rang on the bedside table. It was Jason. "Good morning, little sister. How's the most stubborn independent woman in Chicago?" Emily laughed, stretching on the bed like a lazy cat. "She's great, thank you. And how's my favorite brother?" "Good, considering." "I'm your only brother. Listen, do you have plans for lunch today? I wanted to tell you something." "Sure, that Japanese restaurant you like. Actually, I thought about cooking at home. It's been a while since we've done that." Emily noticed something different in Jason's voice, a contained excitement that aroused her curiosity. "Is something happening that I should know about?" "Maybe. Let's save it for talking in person." After hanging up, Emily took a long shower and dressed carefully. She had learned to value these moments of tranquil routine after months of tension and uncertainty. Life had acquired a more sustainable, more real rhythm. The way to Jason's apartment, she passed a newsstand and saw a headline that made her stop. "Businessman Richard Sanders arrested in operation against money laundering." The photograph showed Richard being escorted by federal agents, his hands cuffed, the expression of arrogance replaced by evident defeat. Emily bought the newspaper and read the complete article on a park bench nearby. The operation had been the result of a 2-year investigation, but confidential sources suggested that crucial information had been recently provided by pharmaceutical sector businessmen who had decided to collaborate with justice. She knew, without needing confirmation, that Nathan had been instrumental in Richard's downfall, not through revenge or violence, but using the appropriate legal channels. It was a demonstration of how he had changed, of how both had learned to deal with conflicts in a more mature way. When Emily arrived at Jason's apartment, she found him preparing an elaborate lunch, grilled salmon, mushroom risotto, a complex salad that suggested he had spent hours in the kitchen. "Since when do you cook like this?" Emily asked, hugging her brother. "Since I met someone who inspires me to be a better man," Jason replied, and Emily noticed the blush on his cheeks. Aha, I knew there was something different about you. Emily sat at the kitchen counter watching. Jason finished the dishes. Tell me everything. Her name is Caroline. She's an architect, 28 years old, and... Jason paused, a silly smile spreading across his face. And I think I'm truly in love for the first time in my life. Emily felt a wave of genuine happiness for her brother. After years of taking care of her, carrying the weight of family responsibility, Jason deserved to find his own happiness. When am I going to meet her? Actually, she's coming here in a bit. I hope you like her. Caroline arrived at 2 in the afternoon carrying a bottle of wine and a warm smile that immediately won Emily over. She was a naturally beautiful woman, with curly hair tied in an unpretentious way and intelligent eyes that suggested someone accustomed to quickly evaluating people. So you're the famous Emily, Caroline said, hugging her as if they had been friends for years. Jason talks so much about you that I feel like I already know you. The lunch was a revelation. Emily observed the dynamic between Jason and Caroline, seeing in them the kind of natural partnership she was learning to build with Nathan. There was lightness, humor, mutual respect, all the elements that had been missing in the toxic relationships of the past. It was during dessert that Caroline asked a question that caught Emily by surprise. Jason told me about your history. So with Nathan Hayes, it must have been very complicated to navigate through all that. Emily hesitated, still not accustomed to speaking openly about her relationship. It is complicated, but we're learning to build something healthy. He seems to love you very much, Caroline continued gently. From what Jason tells me, the man completely transformed after you two reunited. Emily looked at Jason, who nodded. It's true, Emily. Nathan is different now, more human, you know? Less controlling, more present. That afternoon, walking back home, Emily reflected on Caroline's observation. Nathan really had changed, and so had she. The relationship they were building now was based on conscious choices, not obsessions or dependencies. When she got home, she found Nathan waiting for her at the entrance of the building. There was something different about his posture, a nervousness she rarely saw in him. "Hi," he said, kissing her softly. "How was lunch?" "Jason is in love," Emily replied, intertwining her fingers with his. "And you? What brings you here on Saturday afternoon? I wanted to show you something." They went up to Emily's apartment, where Nathan took an envelope from his jacket pocket. "It arrived this morning. It's official." Emily opened the envelope and found legal documents. It took a few seconds to understand what she was reading. It was the complete transfer of all the properties that Nathan had used to help her family over the years. The apartment where she and Jason had lived, the scholarships, everything was being legally transferred to her. "Nathan, I can't accept this." "It's not a gift," he explained. "It's a correction. These things were always rightfully yours. I was just improperly administering them." Emily stared at him, seeing in him the man she had learned to love, not perfect, but genuinely committed to doing the right things. "And if I don't want these properties, and if I want to continue building my life on my own, then you sell everything and donate the money to charity, or use it to finance your own publishing house, or burn it all in a bonfire if you want." Nathan smiled. "The important thing is that it's your choice." Emily folded the documents and placed them on the coffee table. Then she approached Nathan, putting her hands on his chest. "I love you," she said, "but we need to establish some rules if we're going to make this really work." "What kind of rules?" "First, no financial surprises. If you want to help me with something, ask first. Second, no solving my problems without me asking. Third, if we have children someday, they'll grow up knowing they can achieve things on their own merit." Nathan nodded solemnly. "And in return you get a real partner. Someone who chose to be with you not out of dependency or gratitude, but out of genuine love." Nathan kissed her then, a kiss that carried promises of a future built on solid foundations. When they separated, Emily saw in his eyes not the sick obsession of the past, but the mature love of a man who had learned to see in her not an extension of his fantasies, but a complete and independent person. "So," she said, smiling mischievously, "how about we start working on that partnership?" Nathan laughed, picking her up and spinning her around the small but cozy living room. "I think we can make this work." Outside, Chicago continued its frantic dance, indifferent to the personal dramas of its inhabitants. But in the Lincoln Park apartment, two people had finally learned that true love wasn't about control or dependence. It was about choosing every day to build something together, keeping their individualities intact. Emily had finally found what she had been, seeking without knowing, a love that strengthened her instead of diminishing her, a partner who respected her instead of trying to mold her, and most importantly, the courage to be completely herself, without fear or shame. The story that had begun with secrets and manipulation had transformed into something genuine and lasting. And for the first time since she had woken